Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Nachtbeeren. I'm an event facilitator here at Nelli Robinson Booksellers. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 1 territory, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Aninawak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, as well as the homeland of the Red River Métis. Additionally, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself are some of the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. And we'd like to thank you so much for gathering here tonight for a very special evening for the Winnipeg launch of Nightberries by German author Elina. Let's give her a round of applause. Many thanks go to Sue Sorensen and CMU Press for helping make this book and this evening a reality. And of course, for Andrew Unger for coming on board to host. Let's give them a round of applause as well. So in just a moment, Sue will be out to introduce both guests before a reading from Elina. Following that, there will be a conversation between Elina and Andrew Unger. Following that, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. So if you do have a question tonight, let that accumulate throughout the evening. And then once the time comes, I'll just ask you to raise your hand nice and high for me to see. And I'll rotate this wireless microphone just to make sure you're heard on tonight's live stream for the folks who are watching at home. And then I'll be back at the end to review signing procedure, which will of course take place on the table to my right. But for now, I have the pleasure of introducing Sue Sorensen. Thank you, everybody.
So I'm Sue Sorensen, professor of English at Canadian Mennonite University. Thank you all for being here, and also the director of CMU Press, the tiny and mighty publishing company that we sort of run on a shoestring at CMU. Big gratitude to McNally Robinson, as always, and big gratitude to all of you for being here. And I'm hoping there's some people online that are also taking advantage of this. I just want to have a couple of thanks, and then I will introduce briefly Andrew and Elina and let them take it away. This has been a really fascinating project. Canadian publisher publishing the English translation for North America of a novel written by a German author and translated by an American translator. And it was actually the American translator Bradley Schmidt who brought this project to us, and then I worked with Elina's publisher, Aufbau Verlag in Berlin, who had brought out Nachtbeeren in 2022, and some of you have read that book in German, and they wanted an appropriately friendly North American publisher, and I thought, yes, we can do this, but I've never published a book like this before at CMU Press, so this was quite an adventure. My first thanks is to Bradley Schmidt. I hope he's in Leipzig right now. I hope he's listening. Bradley was fascinating to work with, and he moved heaven and earth to make this thing happen. CMU Press doesn't have a lot of money. Indeed, we actually don't have any money. So Bradley found his own funding for his own translation, self-funded his work. So that was astonishing. So thank you, Bradley. Thank you to Jonathan Dick, who's here tonight, who made the beautiful cover for Nightberries, which the author is very happy with, and it's lovely when authors are happy. A couple of thanks to people who are, well, one of them is here, especially thanks to Paul Dirksen at CMU and Sarah Clausen, who helped with some of the Low German. I copy edited this book, but I don't read either German or Low German, which was interesting. So occasionally I would come across a question and I would ask lots of people. I would wander around and say, what do you think this means? But Sarah particularly gave me good advice, and so did Paul Dirksen, so I'm very grateful for that. And I'm very grateful that a little group of people clubbed together and came up with funding to bring Elina from Germany. She has 2 events in North America. This event tonight, this is her book birthday, and then tomorrow in Toronto, and then she goes back to Germany. And the major funding came from the German Canadian Congress, the Manitoba division. I'm particularly grateful to Lydia, the president, and Lars, the vice president, who gave us a substantial amount of funding for the travel. And then there was a number of individuals who I won't name, but very generously helped with individual donations, so I'm very grateful for that. I think those are all my thank yous. I will introduce Andrew, and then Elina, and then Elina can come up and do a little reading and tell you about her book. So Andrew Unger, many of you know him, hails from Steinbeck. He and his wonderful wife, Erin, do all sorts of cultural things in Steinbeck to make it a lively place. Andrew has 3 books out already, and I'm sure you can find them here at McNally. 2 books. 2 books, and the 3rd one coming. Yeah. Well known for writing what was first called the Daily Bonnet and now the Unger Review, and Best of the Bonnet came out of that. Once Removed, his novel, came out several years ago, and any moment now there will be his 3rd book called Just Satire, Comedy and Commentary in an Age of Chaos. Hopefully any moment now. Hopefully we can come back for that launch. Elina Neufeld, Nachtbeeren in 2022 was her first novel, and she can tell you about her background, born in the Soviet Union, moving to Germany as a young child. Some of that serves as the underpinnings of this novel. But Nachtbeeren was her first novel, and then a collection of nonfiction, which hasn't been translated into English, but if it was, it would be translated as Migrant Mother. And then her latest novel, her 2nd novel, was just published, and it hasn't been translated yet, but if it were, it would be called The Unrepentant. And she says there are no Mennonites in it. She lives in the Westphalia region of Germany, and she has to hurry back because she now has a new job working for the German Parliament, for the Bundestag. So she had a few days off and came from her job there. So please welcome Elina Neufeld.
Thank you so much. This is still very, very surreal to be here. I don't know, feels like I hopped on a plane and, got out, and all of a sudden I'm in Canada for the first time. I also just realized today, I have to admit, how far into the continent we really are. I wasn't, I'm usually really good with geography, but yeah, it's because, yeah, you're right. I started a new job and life has been crazy if it hasn't been for the last 4 years, because true to my Mennonite nature, I've published 4 books in 4 years, and that has been quite stressful. I've been touring nonstop with all 3 of the major books, not the children's book, and meanwhile, raising kids in my free time. So this is just so amazing. And it's so great to be here. So thank you, Sue, for everything you made happen. I can't, thank you enough, because this has been very healing too, to actually talk about the Mennonite themes in here and not just the Russian German themes. But we'll get to that with Andrew. I will read only like a few pages from a few chapters, so you'll have an idea of what's going on, and then we can talk about everything. All right. Nightberries are poisonous. Mennonites eat them anyway. You need a lot of sugar for nightberries. You can make clothes with them, or prentes. You can fill them with glans. That's what we Mennonites call cottage cheese. Then you don't have to put extra sugar on top, just plenty of thick cream, gravy, fat. Nightberries are very dark, almost black. They are small and bitter. If animals eat too many of them, their milk tastes bitter. Gorka, as the Russians say, clinking glasses and kissing, hoping that the sweet kisses will get rid of the bitterness. The unripe fruit can poison you, but aside from small children and stupid chickens, no one eats unripe nightberries. Some people get scared, can't breathe, get cramps so bad you can't move. It can kill you, the books say. In the books, nightberries are called black nightshade, either because of the color of the berries or because they can pull you deep into the eternal night. The Americans call them wonderberries. There are many other names: nightingale, day and night wort, roe dirt, inkberries, black bottlewort, poison flower, poison wort, poison berries, devil wort, devil's berries, devil's cherries, devil's dirt, devil's claw, Jewberries, catberries, sour, south death, Hen's death, shipberries, shipwort, cherrywort, elkwort, barkwort, and wild potato. They're given all these different names, but they're all for the same little weed. It even pushes its way up through the cement in Berlin. It's so well adapted that it can survive on only water and sunlight, and it grows best in places where no one looks at the margins. No one knows where nightberries first came from. Eurasia, the books say. Area of origin unknown, dragged everywhere. Nightberries grow in bunches, lots of little berries, huddled together. They can be found in groups. They don't abandon each other. You probably will have seen them without knowing what they are. You can't identify things if you don't know them. And maybe they don't want to be identified. Maybe they'd rather be left in peace. And they're just there. They can't be wiped out. They always come back. They're called nightberries. Burying. Nelli Neufeld, Sunday afternoon, May 10th, 2020. I'll bury all of you. I'm sitting at the table in Öma's house, looking at my brothers stuffing food into their mouths, at the scars on their faces and the faded greenish tattoos covering their hands. Solitary Cyrillic letters made up of needle poke marks. One mark, one poke, lots of suns. If my husband were here now, he'd be the only one without tattoos, and the only one not just using his fork to stab his meat, but also for cutting it up. Even when sitting next to his 4 brothers-in-law, whom he's known for 15 years, Cornelius acts like he's at a business lunch with locals. I have seen him eat differently. He shouldn't put on airs. But now he isn't here anyway. It's Sunday afternoon and my head is heavy. Another week's gone, but tomorrow it will all start up again and again, over and over. It never ends. There's always another Monday and a new week. Time only stops on Sunday when I sit here with all of the people I call Anza, our people. I hear the name Putin and get up to go to the bathroom again. By the time I'm back, they'll have moved on to Yeltsin or Hitler. They call both of them Grandpa, jokingly, but affectionately. The hallway is so dark that really I ought to turn the light on to find the light switch for the bathroom, but I don't bother. The switch has been in the same place for almost 30 years, and I can manage a few steps in the dark. In the bathroom, I have to put the light on. In Minden's local newspaper, I recently saw an advertisement listing a bathroom with natural lighting, as if it were something special and important that needed to be stressed, as if you could crack better in sunlight. Moving on. Rolling. We're still on Sunday afternoon, May 10th, 2020, and this is Nelli's perspective. While the women solemnly dig through the crystal bowl, the men share a bottle of supermarket whiskey, Biaski. Every time I was pregnant, the scent of this whiskey alone made me vomit. I didn't need a pregnancy test. I just waited until I couldn't stand Sunday afternoons any longer. Then I was sure. I was fortunate that Cornelius didn't drink alcohol around me following his conversion. His in-laws respected that. One of the brothers had to beaten and only liked shandy. They respected that too. That one person is Eugen. He is the youngest son, the smallest of them. I came so much later, 10 years after Eugen. The 3 eldest weren't living at home by then. I actually hardly knew them. I didn't know what they were like as children or what their lives were like in the Soviet Union. I'm surrounded by 4 men who are my brothers. As far as my son Jakob is concerned, they're simply the uncles. When I'm alone with Eugen, he calls them the oxen. They had a life in Russia. I only spent half of my childhood there. I can't remember it. Rudi, Arthur, Eduard, Eugen. So Rudy, Arthur, Edward, Eugene. Huge men who take it for granted that they spend a Sunday afternoon drinking this cheap whiskey and assume that our father would soon fetch the second bottle from our grandfather's cupboard. Every Sunday, 2 of them have been drinking since they woke up. One of them will be standing next to an assembly line today, the other is working at a construction site tomorrow. Men like them are sometimes put in a box by their bosses based on the way they pronounce the letter R, which is misinterpreted. A rolled R is Russian. No 2's ever have the same sound in German. The pronunciation of ST could be used to judge whether or not the speaker comes from northern Germany, but only Russians roll their R's. Even with German first and last names, not a single branch manager in all of East Westphalia bats an eye when standing across from an Eugen, a Heinrich, or Eduard. Herr Janssen, Herr Krieger, or Neufeld doesn't provoke a reaction, but Rudi Braun, Eugen Epp, Peter Penner. Actually, with the name Penner, they do pause a bit. People know, that could be one of them. Would have to be, because who'd be from here and have the last name Penner? But the letter R can be rolled in different ways. The Mennonite R is rolled more quietly. The tip of the tongue very carefully taps the front teeth, the top front teeth. Rudi. It tickles while being hidden, doesn't want out, it's just there. People would really like to get rid of the R, but it's needed to say Nachtbeeren, Nachtbeeren. The high German R in berries, Beeren, comes from the back of your mouth. The plotige R is rolled up into the front with your tongue, not the throaty growl. No managers in East Westphalia care. Russians roll their R's, and that's that. I hear it in the drugstore, supermarket checkout, or in the blueberry field, the hushed voices, how they call their grandchildren, how they consider which cake should be baked, and who is planning to emigrate to Canada. I don't know all of them, usually none at all, although they usually recognize each other as Onze, as one of us. Whenever I'm out and about and notice one of them, I close my eyes for a moment and I hear my Oma, feel her hands stroking my hair, and sense a laugh that is loud and hearty. In that very moment, I yearn for the security of those hands, but most of the time I just can't because, well, I'm standing at the supermarket checkout out of the meadow outside the refugee accommodation where I'm 5 years old and eating her grusnitz and waving wreaths out of dandelions. I'm no longer stuck in a timeless liminal place where we didn't have or could do anything or know anything. Now everything has become serious and real. We've been here far too long. We know how things work and, even know the sayings ourselves. To be honest, there is no Eduard, just like there's no Johann and no Eugen. Those are all made up names picked by West German officials when we entered the country. Sometimes with, a little more emphasis, sometimes they accepted the names as they were. What were they to do, the locals, with all these Cyrillic birth certificates, ethnicity, German? But what's the name? The translation says Ivan, or Ivan with a W, Ivan with a W. That's not German. And since an Ivan doesn't have a chance, he becomes a Johann or Andreas. You give them the chance for a fresh start. What is better than a sensible new German first name? Adult men, retirees, and little girls all received new names and were a little more German, easier to integrate, although no one used that term at the time. And Olga stayed in Olga because she was more proud. She would never have changed her name to Ottilia or Anna, but that's exactly what they'd done with the others. They always offered the option, but no one believed they actually had the choice, not after going 200 years without. At home, they would still be called Hons, Oidi, Geroide, Henny. Was it any different that the Soviets called them Ivan and the Kartoffeln, which means potatoes, called them Andreas? Right, moving on. So we're switching to my favorite, Eugen. All right, so now it's May 20th, 2010, and it's a Thursday, and the chapter is called Dying. Thank you for your love was written on the left side of the bow. Your Jakob was on the right side. The wreaths and bouquets belonging to the children and grandchildren were in a line slightly to the side. Upa's wreath was right next to the casket, and you couldn't get it any closer. He was even thanking her on the day of her burial, not only emphasizing his own love or swearing how much he would miss her. No, he thanked her for her love. We'd lost the ground under our feet that day. We were all devastated, destroyed, and helpless. There couldn't have been a single person in the church who didn't sense that pain or feel it themselves. It wasn't a burial, it was a catastrophe. I was standing outside the church next to the main entrance, like most of the other young men. The smokers were far away from the parking lot next to the street, so they could smoke one last cigarette. We stood outside to greet and welcome people, helping the Bacchus and Umas walk in. Large 3-liter Tupperware containers with salad or animal sheven and a cloth covering the toy Bacchus that had to be taken to the basement for afterwards. And that was also our responsibility. I walked toward Nelli when she got out of the car with Jakob. Cornelius drove off to look for a parking spot further away so that the elderly could park closer. Those are things that Cornelius thought of, and no one had to explain them to him. As an immediate family member, he could have parked right in front, but that didn't come into question for him. He was a healthy man, he could walk. As long as his legs worked, the parking spot right next to the entrance were for those for whom that was no longer the case. How are you supposed to learn these small things if you grow up like most of the locals in Germany, without family, without the church, without community? We weren't raised that way. It was simply a reality. This watching after each other, always looking out for how the elderly are doing, helping where you can, wherever assistance is needed. Jakob was 5 years old. He walked up to me and shouted, "Uncle Genia, hello!" He didn't know anyone else there, and I think he'd never been inside the church either. Nelli had left him at home with Cornelius for the burial of her Öleuma because it'd been more of an obligation for her. Gathering together, burying the dead, drinking coffee. I don't know that word, repast? All right. The repast and Uma's Yad was the actual funeral. Her 99 years of life could be celebrated. Uma truly was old. Little Jakob only knew her as a woman in bed with white hair. For years, we expected her death to come any day, she even more than us. We talked so much about how she wanted to go home that we simply couldn't imagine that her 77-year-old daughter would also die someday. We just assumed that she would become at least as old as her mother, but maybe even older. Anything under 100 was too soon. You can't just tell the potatoes that Nelli and I should have lost Uma, our great-grandmother, later in life. I was already 35, Nelli was at least 25. We were simply used to having another grandmother, not having just our one grandmother. Potatoes don't even have a grandma at that age. That means little Jakob is more of a potato than we are because he had to bury his great-grandmother at the age of 5, and no one expected that. 2 burials so close together. He didn't have to go to the first one, but he should be here for this one. We agreed on that. He was wearing a suit with a bow tie. Well, he'll be able to wear that to some wedding one day, I thought. I had to accompany my sister to the department store and look for something fancy made of polyester. The main thing was that it wasn't too expensive and he could use it again. What a hot day it was. Jakob tugged and pulled at the uncomfortable fabric, and we were sweating from just sitting there. The children's room was the only one with air conditioning, so Nelli and I hurried right in there. You really have to give it to the Mennos. Mothers and children must lack for nothing, even fresh air. We walked past, looking on the ground so no one touched us or talked to us. It was all too much. Everyone wanted to talk with us or touch us, and we wanted nothing. For us, it was truly like a movie. It all went past us. Look, Mom, a boat with animals. Jacob, that's Noah's Ark. You know it from preschool, the story of the flood. How everyone is saved. Well, not everyone, just Noah's family and the animals. He nodded and started play-acting war and dying with the animals. You can send him to Sunday school. They'll make sure he doesn't forget about Noah. The teachers at the Steiner school are falling behind. It's Montessori. And I've been thinking about it already, to be honest. They're not serious. Why not? Isn't that a part of him as well? I'd always gone with her, and so I was thinking. She didn't say any more. Tears were bursting out of her swollen red eyes. You hated it, Nelli. You hated it to death. You weren't even allowed to read aloud, and the others in class gave you the cold shoulder because you had short hair and pierced ears. Maybe. But it always happened. I knew that Sundays I had Sunday school. I did my homework, collected the stickers, and the pictures we colored. It was a routine. Yeah, I do think about it. But does he have to go here? Can't he go to some, Protestant church where it's not always focused on how terrible everything is and how Jesus really, really is coming soon? He's already starting school next year, and they have religious instruction there, right? I don't know. Preachers are coming, let's go up front. Get up, Jacob, it's starting. Jacob dropped everything and reached for his mother's hand. I quickly cleaned up so that all the animals had a spot on the ark. Right. Thank you, Schultz. Thank you.
All right, so thanks so much for that. The reading, what was it like to, you wrote this in German, right? Now
Yeah.
you're reading in English. Is that a bit odd?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very strange. I saw something funny yesterday where someone was, flexing, saying, I speak 4 languages fluently, but I don't know how to say table or either one of them. So that's probably the reality, kind of. It's very odd. It's super strange, especially because so much of it is so very German still,
Right.
also, but it's also Low German culturally. So to have that as an English text, I mean, I remember what it felt like to read Rudi Wiebe or Miriam Toews for the first time in my life. And it does something, right? It does something with your brain to even recognize the words that you usually only heard, especially pre-internet, when there were only books. But it's odd.
That's Rudy Weeben and Miriam Tapes, I think she said.
Sorry.
We say it in these very Anglo pronunciations. You have the more correct pronunciation there. I've been waiting, years to read this book, and I've had, I loved it. I'm so grateful that I finally got a chance to read this in English because I can't read German, and I got this German copy from Bradley Schmidt a few years ago, and I realized that I had it for years unread on my shelf the wrong way. Because why in Europe do you have the spines like
I
that?
don't know. But I think it's random. I don't think there's a system behind it because it's all different. But how else would you do it?
Well, look. See? It's different.
Huh. Well, this would be the Latin way of
Yeah.
reading. This is Arabic, pretty much, or Hebrew.
Yeah.
So you're reading from
Maybe it's
the right.
Potiche, I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe it is. I don't know. Whatever. I get more frustrated with formats of books. I think all books should be formatted into the same way, so my shelves look nicer.
You don't have to put some this way and somewhat that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, as I said, I've been waiting years for this, and finally I got a chance to read it, and it was marvelous, and I really, really love this book. It's can I say there's like dark humor? There's humor, dark humor.
Yes.
Yeah, it's even some of the stuff you read just now, you saw a little bit of that there. So I could tell the moment that I started reading this, finally, recently, I thought that you were writing about like my people. In some ways, there's so many like connections there that I could make to the characters and situations and stories in your book. In fact, I don't want to take too much time doing this, but I actually found out.
What gave it away?
Well, the surnames, the food, the situations, that sort of thing. We are 8 cousins.
Really?
Yeah. Look. I don't.
Save that for now.
I can show you this later, but we're
All
8
right.
cousins. Our common ancestor is Johann Funk, born in 1739. So.
You know what? I'm sure I'm related to a lot of people in this room. I'm not even. Yeah, except for Sue, of course.
So do you think that? I mean, I'm not expecting you to get into my head, but do you think that this connection that I felt to the book is a reflection of, shared human experiences, or is that specifically this Mennonite history thing that I'm noticing?
There was a person in Germany in a bookstore that said she doesn't like that it's always being called a Mennonite book or a Mennonite novel. She says it's a novel about silence and it's a novel about family, so I think a lot of that is in there too. But yeah, 100%, you were reading it in a completely different, or from a completely different perspective. And it's not just that you recognize things, you probably felt them too, right? Just the little things. I feel that same when I watch TV and they actually take their shoes off at the door. So I'm like, oh, you know, and that's connection. And I think, yeah, food will do that to you, and also little things. So I married a real German, and I didn't recognize how Low German or Plattdeutsch or Mennonite I was, or my family was, until I married that man. Because it's so many things that are so super normal for me. And so I think that's in the text, and I didn't even have to try. I just wrote down things I had seen at some point. And you probably have seen too, because obviously we're related. So.
Yeah. 8 cousins, yeah. Were you consciously trying to fill a gap in representation of Mennonites or Low German or?
Yes.
Okay.
100%. It was a marketing decision. No, it was, so I was very late to the party. I was in my early 30s when I got an agent, and we talked about a lot of possibilities of what I could write about. And her eyes just lit up when I mentioned a religious minority. She was just like, what? And she started Googling, she's like, yes. And she realized there wasn't a single book on the German market by a German author with a major publisher.
Yeah.
So there was some publishing or some books about like Russian German Aussiedler in general. And there was obviously a lot of also, you know, with Olga Graznova or Elina, you had a lot of Jewish authors who talked about the experience to coming to Germany in the 90s or 80s as Aussiedler. And you had the wonderful Emilia Smichowski, who wrote about the Polish side of being an Aussiedler or a repatriated German. But nobody was Mennonite. Nobody was, you know, from the Russian German perspective with a major house, so they were just so happy. And this was right at like the big moment of women talking, and so they were just excited.
You know, in Canada, obviously Mennonite literature is a big thing. There's a lot of well-known Mennonite authors. But even so, I think outside of Manitoba and some other, you know, pockets, you have to explain what a Mennonite is, even in Canada. And so is that, does the general, you said a real German, you were married to a real German?
He's a West German German. Yeah.
Does, amongst the real German population, do you have to explain what a Mennonite is?
Every day, all day, 24/7, till this day. No, not stop. And but the most frustrating thing is that when I lived in the US, there was a lot more, believe it or not, I'm that serious, there was a lot more knowledge. And also, once you've explained it to them, even if they didn't know it, they was like, oh yeah, they're the ones with the good chicken, right? So they would go to Mennonite farmers markets and stuff. So they totally knew what Mennonites were. But in Germany, even if you explained it, you know, for 30 years in a row to your next door neighbors, they will still call you Russian. So for the community in Germany, it was very hurtful because, as described in the book too, it really did feel like such a homecoming for them, right? It had such this exile moment of return. It wasn't another stop along the way. It wasn't, you know, no offense, Canada or South America, whatever. It really was, this was supposed to be the last stop. They would come home. And so they got there, and they also got there at the same time as, you know, the 90% others, like Russian Germans and Volga German descendants. And, you know, I get sassy with it and a little cynical, but obviously there's a reason why they were able to keep Plattdeutsch and Low German, you know, for themselves and were able to speak it, and the others weren't. You know, some of it is luck, some of it is history, and it's not that the Russian Germans that came, who had to come from Kazakhstan or Siberia, and didn't speak any German, especially not any Plattdeutsch, were any less German or any worse, but it was like some healthy amount of arrogance that came with the privilege of being able to, having been able to conserve that language, which was just pure geography because Stalin just didn't care to deport those people.
your characters talk a lot about feeling, the feeling of being outsiders. But to what degree do you think this is a feeling that they're reacting to the way people actually perceive them versus this sort of Mennonite propensity to sort of self-impose this outsider? Because, you know, living in sort of isolated communities and things. So to what degree is this feeling of being an outsider coming from other groups versus self-imposed?
I don't think other groups can recognize it. I can only speak for Germany and like my experiences or my research. I don't think they can see it. They can see people who are in the church because they dress a certain way. So they can recognize that, but they put them into another box. It's funny, in German we say drawer. So we put people into drawers, and in English you put them into boxes. So I don't know. But I think it has a lot to do with the language, and because it's such a great language to keep secrets. You said earlier that your parents used it to be secretive. That's how my parents used Russian with us. So when you speak it, you know, maybe in Germany or the Netherlands, or as I have recently discovered in the Flemish part of Belgium, they will like turn and be like, oh, that sounds like something, you know. But they most of the time, even when you speak Low German, you're like, oh, it's so great that you speak Russian with your kids. Buddy. So to me, I would always say this is about the language because we're able to keep that kind of like a secret. And I think it's also for all of this history and all of that time, you always had to kind of look over your shoulder a little bit, and it kind of stayed with you, this feeling of maybe, can I trust that person? Can I stay here? Is this forever? Is this my spot? Or do I have to leave again? Do I have to pack another suitcase? Is this safe? So I feel like sometimes it was out of fear, but also out of opportunity, because you always were able to keep this like beautiful, funny, secret language to yourself. And if you did recognize it, like from the part that I've read, it feels divine, right? To hear it somewhere in public, it's such a treat. And because it is very melodic and it's hilarious. I've had trouble explaining Low German humor to Germans, which is, yeah, I know it's a challenge in itself to explain humor, but they wouldn't really get it, but I felt sometimes it worked a little bit with like Yiddish humor and some of it like the level of darkness, but also of lightness in terms of, yeah, it really like the yin yang thing, it kind of worked for me. So I would say, yeah, language, that's the.
So there's untranslated Plautdietsch in,
Yeah,
as there was in the original German version. So that was important to you to include the language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure, I had way more in there. They cut like a lot. I had entire conversations, and I also refused to have it explained. I did want to have like maybe an essay in the beginning or in the end that would explain a little bit of history, but I wasn't very fond of the idea of like a glossary.
Right.
I didn't want that.
So there's like three kind of perspectives that the story is told from. Can you talk a little bit about those three perspectives and why you chose that structure? Yeah.
So the I don't know how much time we have, but so somebody talked about funerals earlier, but obviously I also go to a lot of funerals with my grandma. And it was one year, years and years ago, that my father went to another funeral, and they had come back, and it happened to be a suicide, and he just kind of like nonchalantly talked about it. It's like, oh, he drove himself to death, something like that. I was like, oh, okay. And we got to talking, and I started Googling, and I wasn't aware of the fact that, suicide rates for men are so much higher. And we got into this like whole conversation, and that really was the moment Nightberries was born, because it was always supposed to be a book about men and the pressure. So especially the pressure that Low German or Mennonite men were under when they had to come to Germany. This whole obsession with building a house, right? ASAP.
Right.
And a specific house, a big house, especially if they had lived through the years of the refugee camps or the emergency housing that we had. And it was like ingrained in them that they would have a house that no one could take away from them again. And, but that would also mean, you know, to have a job without any kind of higher education that would pay enough. So that would leave you with either, you know, breaking the law occasionally or doing a lot of work under the table at construction sites for the women, you know, to go take a lot of cleaning jobs, maid jobs. That is like not just the financial stress, but also what it did to the bodies of these men was intense. So I've always wanted to write about that because, you know, alcoholism is also a topic in there. So these men were always looking for ways to cope with this stress. And it's obviously not a Mennonite issue. That's a societal issue, probably here as well as it is in Germany. And we see the results of this now, 40 years later, with the kind of podcast culture that we have and alpha male culture. And so I wrote about it within this world in particular, but I was always going for, you know, what do men, and I'm not saying, you know, men suffer more or anything from, but they suffer from a different kind of pressure, whereas Nelli, in this book, she chooses community. She chooses not just her grandma, but she chooses church as a way to find community first. It's not even about faith in that moment first, but it's about her wanting connection. And Eugen didn't have that. Eugen had to move away. He had to find it somewhere differently. And so the men in the book don't have that. And I did forget the question, but you wanted to know about the three people.
Perspectives, yeah.
And that's kind of, that is the three, you know, for Nelli, she came later. So Eugen and Jacob were there first.
Okay.
And I've always had the brothers.
Yeah.
I've always had these men that, you know, work extremely hard and have just exhausting jobs, but they all show up every Sunday. And that was obviously a huge part of me growing up too, right? I mean, that's not, the thing is also, you know, people always ask, you know, how much of yourself is in there? And I'm like, yeah, but any Mennonite or Low German who's read this, like, well, that's what we do on Sundays. I don't know what, you know, that's not special.
Not the drinking part, though.
Maybe that's
The
a German thing.
the vodka in the afternoons.
Well, so my grandma at some point, you know, had this hack where she would not invite for FASPA, but she would do breakfast. So we would meet for breakfast every other Sunday, and they wouldn't drink. So, and they didn't always drink, but in this book they do. Again, it's all just loosely inspired, right? So the men were there first. I always wanted to focus on that. There's a lot about those pressures. And then Nelli came because I was obsessed with the word for Wolfschittel. Does anyone know automatically what it is? Wolfschittel. It's it's an autumn chick. It's a child that is born after you were done with family planning. So it's a child that has, you know, ridiculously older siblings, which happens every now and then in Mennonite families. It's like, you know, these are my 60-year-old brothers. I'm 30. No, but so good for them. But that's Nelli. So Nelli, in all ways possible, feels like there's no one there. So she always looks for that. And there's one part in that book where Eugen, her brother, tells her, all of this could have, tells Jakob, all of this could have happened to anyone else, but it happened to her and she wasn't able to cope.
Mm-hmm.
So that didn't work out. And I chose these three because they are part of the generation that was taken with them. So neither one of them were adults.
Right.
When they were taken to Germany. It wasn't their decision to make. And Eugen, Eugene, was a teenager. Nelli was a child. And Jakob didn't exist yet. He's one of the first ones to be born in Germany. but he's born into a family that has not arrived yet mentally. They're only arrived as workforces. But other than that, their head is everywhere, but not where they are.
I actually pulled that quote that Nelli says, I think, if I have this right, I wasn't German, I wasn't Russian, so I became religious.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between identity and religion?
Yeah. So obviously, for my family, for me being Mennonite, being Low German, didn't even have that much relation with religion per se. It was very much about food and just being together and speaking the language. And yeah, we would pray before meals, but it wasn't like a big deal. And I've always grown up with it being very much a decision. But this is my perspective as a 39-year-old person who got there in 1991 and saw the church in West Germany kind of like grow or develop, right? And so a lot of these people who then went there saw it just as a replacing the community they were missing from the villages. So they just showed up in whatever they were wearing. So if you look at pictures from the early or mid 90s, it's like Studio 54 in there, right? It all glitters and sparkles and it's golden and it's gorgeous. It's like, happy pride, y'all. But it was amazing. And that's how I always saw that. And my grandma was an amazing gossiper. So if I would sit in church, she would just tell me all the stories about every single man up there preaching, how much he used to drink, who he cheated on, how many children he has out of wedlock. So I just always saw it as like this fun place, right? And then I became a teenager, I started partying, I didn't show up to Sunday school anymore that much. And I came back, and I was like, whoa, what happened? I don't know, I wasn't there for a bunch of years, and all of a sudden it's like, they're wearing white linen tennis shoes, and skirts got longer, and the blouses got, I look very Mennonite appropriate today. But it's a very light dress, so it's good for the suitcase. That was very, very strange for me, and that's kind of in the book, and it was important for me that Nelli had a complete life before she decided to convert. And it was one of the few things that's so left in my brain from the 90s is when people decided to convert, right? Because it was still like this huge act. And then you came back in the 2000s or 2010s and nobody converted anymore. Everybody was converted, right? Everybody was born into the church. And oh yeah, we have those too. Oh, okay.
It says a tornado warning. Okay, we're okay. We're okay.
Carry on. Right. I make jokes about all of this, but it's just things, I saw. And then I needed to have Jakob in there. So her son, Jacob, basically grew up within the community. He only knows like a faithful life, and he is training to become baptized. And he's very eager. And it's also I remember it so clearly. So when my grandma got baptized, and that's in the book too, she was, it was all seniors up on stage, and like one teenager. And then when my grandpa got baptized after my grandma had died, so he got baptized, I think in 2021, he was the only person over the age of 16 up there. So that was just those two instances for me to have experienced that, to have seen that. That's what happened within 30 years. That's all good.
Yeah.
I've had great conversations.
We're all okay.
Yeah, no, we're all okay. And I've had great conversations the last 2 days about how here it's, obviously a little bit different and stuff. But those 30 years, especially in East Westphalia, with the rise of churches and the rise of private schools and stuff, that was what definitely made it into the book. Yeah.
I've never been to a baptism of a senior citizen before.
No?
Never been interested.
Well, there's food afterwards, so.
Yeah. Were you involved in the translation process?
Yeah,
Did you have any
little bit.
influence over that, or?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, okay, you were, okay.
I mean, I got to read it, and Bradley had sent some things, and we had interesting conversations, and it was just, it's a challenge for sure. It's hard, because you have to know that world kind of, right?
Right,
But I
right.
think he did an excellent job.
I mean, Nightberries, the title, I think there literally are Nightberries in the book.
Yeah,
But when you were reading that section now, I was reminded of how it's also a metaphor for the people.
yes.
Yeah, that was a very beautiful section that you chose to read there. I think we'll open it up now for questions from the audience. All of you who braved the tornado warning or whatever that was, whatever that was.
Do we have any questions out of the audience? Yeah.
Thank you for coming here. First of all, this was a real treat. Maybe I have so many questions, but maybe I'll just keep it to two. Unless anyone else, yeah. Yeah, from reading the translation, did something stick out to you in a new way, or did you experience the book differently, or, yeah?
It feels a little older, right? Because the distance is there. But also, that would be like the only thing in terms of, but I think that is so normal. Even if they would translate it, I don't know, to Korean or something, it would still, because you put a distance in it the second you translate it. I don't think anyone could do that differently. Because when I wrote it, it was so heavy, and it was when people started reading it, it was really two reactions. People really didn't go any other way. It was always one of those two. So people either said, "Oh, I read it in one weekend. I read it in one night." I was like, "Okay, good job. I don't know what to say. Like, do you want a treat?" And then of course people who are either have immigrant parents or have something to do with the Mennonite or the Russian, Low German, they're like, that was hard. And they were like, I managed 2 chapters, and then people would cry and send me voice messages and stuff. And I think, and it still leaves me very emotional. So I think that still translates. It's just that, of course, the original German, because it's so particular to what these people experienced when they got there in the 90s and how it went on, that you have to, imagine it. And it's the same way I read, books about Asian immigrants in New York or Hispanic stories in Texas. And I can relate to that, I can feel it, but I will never get to that level of how someone would read it, So I'm sure that most of the people here in this room will read it and have some kind of connection with that. Especially, obviously there's also like Bible verses in there, and there's things about child rearing and how that should be done. There's so much about mental health and how to be quiet and how to say something and not to say something. And this whole thing of how, it's the wife's responsibility of how the husband is acting. And so if your husband is an alcoholic, that's on you. You need to take care of that. So a lot of that is in there, and I think that obviously works in English too. You can absolutely read that because, people carry a similar trauma, no matter when they came here, probably. Just, probably with different baked goods sometimes. Some of ours are Russian. But I was very, very happy with the translation.
I was going to ask that about the reaction of maybe your family or the Mennonite community in Germany.
Yeah. I heard nothing. That's I think my parents went through hell for a little bit there. Obviously, they would never say something, and then I would have like these amazing readings. And people also then, when the questions come from the audience, be like, so as we all know, this book is very controversial. I was like, tell me, let me know, what are you saying? How is this being discussed? I want to know. But no, they didn't say anything, and but it's fine. I've never received like the only mean mails or whatever I ever received were from Germans. And they were just mad at how Germans were portrayed in this book. I was like, this book isn't about you. And it's like, you're good. So I wish I would have loved to maybe discuss something. There was a lot of criticism why the parents don't play a bigger role. And I always said, well, they were busy working, so they're not there. And I think that's a for most immigrant groups, that's obviously a factor, right? So when you get there, you focus on working, you focus on getting money, somehow you hustle. And it's never just one job. It's obviously you have to do everything at once. And so where are you at? At your grandparents' house, chilling with grandma. Not just grandma, because my grandma was obviously also working. I was chilling with my great grandmother. I was chilling with Uma. And we were walking up and down the canal and feeding the ducks. No, my grandma was a nurse when we got to Germany. And so yeah, I officially don't know anything about any reactions. So I don't know.
Check Reddit.
Yeah. Oh, should I?
I don't know.
Maybe. I don't know if they're on Reddit. So yeah, that's that.
And it's two more real quick, sorry.
Yeah. I'll try to keep it short.
You mentioned sort of feeling sort of late to the party. I don't know if that was when it comes to writing or publishing specifically.
Both.
And it seems like you're sort of making up for lost time the last few years. So I guess maybe my questions would be, yeah, how did you find your agent? Like, did you submit some writing samples? Yeah, how's it been trying to make up for lost time the last 4 years? And then my last question, and I'll give away the mic, is what are your favorite Britney Spears songs?
All right. Definitely Every Time. So that's easy. I really, I know the ones that I really hate. I can get very obsessed with Born to Make You Happy. I don't know if that is the Mennonite in me. But I have a profound love for her, so much. And that song means so much to me, that Every Time song. And I'm teaching the kids now about, the greats. So we are doing Celine, Whitney, Mariah, and Britney. We've also now watched all of the Lindsay Lohan movies that are PG-13. So working on it to teach them something. The other question is, so most of my books are also very much about class, and I talk a lot about class and class systems. I was not aware of the fact that, and I'm dead serious, that you could study writing. This might sound dumb, but again, this was 20 years ago, and it was pre-internet. So I understood that you could become a writer. I was the first one in my family to go to college, so my focus, and I was already a liberal arts major, so that didn't help. So the least I could have done with both degrees was to make money and to pay my bills. So nowhere on the horizon was writing at any point in my life a part of that, except for when I was like 7, and it's in the acknowledgements. And my dad, when I said I want to be a writer, and he's like, what are you going to write about, your sad life? So I was like, when Nightberries came out, it's like, I don't remember saying that. And like, yeah, you did. And so it was very practical. I was living in Berlin. I was having lunch with, my agent, but she was just an acquaintance at that point. And I asked her straight up, I said, what do you have to do to publish a book? Like, she's like, do you write a book? I said, well, we're in Berlin. Doesn't everyone want to write a book? Isn't that what we're here for? And she's like, nope. So I started talking to her. I did have that Mennonite discussion. I wanted to write something different at first, but then she was like, hey, money. And so we had that conversation. Then it took forever because there was also, some children and a move involved and some neurodivergence of not being able to settle down and write. Plus apparently the one gives you money before you write, so I think that's kind of messed up as a motivator. So I didn't qualify for any of these traditional scholarships, and I'm not, intellectual enough to receive them by German standards, because you can laugh at my writing, so it's not considered good quality. And yeah, it's wild out there. No, and so then what actually happened was Christmas 2019. I live in a socialist country, so we have 14 months of parental leave. And my husband was about to start his 7 months of parental leave for our second child. And on Christmas, he basically told me, you're either going to write this book now or you're not, because I can't listen or hear about it anymore. So I started writing January 2nd, 2020, and living off of, the parental leave and some of like minor jobs or something we had. Then COVID hit, which was a blessing because we kind of lived within this cocoon. And it was, I don't know if any of this would have ever happened had it not been for COVID, because I wrote myself into a frenzy. I went completely like into an abyss of insanity, really. It wasn't normal. So I wrote the manuscript within 4 months, and I deep dived into Mennonite history, into Russian German history, into everything. There was so much more in there before. And sometimes it's so messed up when you write books, because for one little sentence, you have to research for like 2 days to get it right. And that was annoying. And then I finished it, they sold it pretty fast, and then I had a publisher, and I have my other books were also published with that same publisher. But I think it was that moment of being like, I want to do this. I have no idea how this works nowadays or in Canada, but where I live, it's, yeah, I wouldn't do anything without.
They don't give you money up front here, are they?
What is this? So yeah, I was dreaming about it yesterday and talking to Sue about it. I was like, whatever happened to like these older rich people who used to patronize, like the arts? That is such a great, they used to, like Thomas Jefferson was also a former president, but he wanted to found a university. Like people, when they were rich, used to build libraries, and like.
Oh, just spaceships.
Yeah, like what is going on? They need to go back and finance. That's why we have so many poor artists, because rich people are going to Mars. Yeah. But there was a question here too.
Yes, we have a quick question there, if you'd like to go for it, yes.
Well, we noticed your book when it came out in German and read it. And what struck me then, having lots of Umsiedler relatives and having lots of contacts to the Mennonite churches in Germany, what I appreciated was your depiction of both the pious, fromme Mennonites and the worldly ones. That I really appreciate. I want to go back to your book to recover that. But I've had trouble with which of my relatives in Germany would I share this book with? Because the pious ones would probably be offended by some of the way they're depicted.
Yeah.
And the worldly ones may be the same.
Yeah.
And so I wondered what has been the response in the Umsiedler community to your book. You said you haven't really gotten much formal feedback, so maybe you've answered the question. I just wanted to appreciate that you depicted the spectrum.
So thank you. I am very, very lucky and privileged that my parents are ridiculously and annoyingly social. They are the most social people, and for the longest time, I thought this was so normal for Low Germans and Mennonites, until people also explained to me that even by Mennonite standards, my parents are not normal. They love, like we would always go somewhere, and we would always receive guests, always, like several, even with all of these jobs I had, I don't know what they did or what was in the water in the 90s, but they were in their 20s, having children, and just always having people over. And that meant that because they were so social, and my father had a job in the Soviet Union where he would also travel a lot. Don't ask me what he did. It had to do with smuggling butter. He would pretend to have the same thing with butter and with. Yeah, but it had something to do with together with my grandpa. They would pretend because the kolkhoze had to meet certain standards, but they would go with the same tub of butter and show it everywhere and be like, oh yeah, here's the butter we produced, but it was always the same tub of butter. So anyway, that's part of what he did. But it would also mean that he would have a lot of pious friends, and they would come over, and then there would be no alcohol. So that was usually how I noticed. And if we were at their houses, there was no TV. And there wasn't just no TV; it was also no radio. But it made no difference to me. I had a good time no matter where I was, being 6 or 7 or 12. And so I grew up never judging either one of them. And somebody said about my book, as you beautifully pointed out, that everyone gets their moment, right? So nobody in the end is left, as like some kind of hero or anything. Maybe, mental health specialists who are having a field day. But I've always, loved having the conversations when there was no drinking, and I've loved the parties and the weddings we went to when there was a lot of drinking. So you also have to see that, there was also a lot of Russian influence, obviously how I grew up. And sometimes when I was reading the Mennonite books from Canada, that was just mentioned on the margin, kind of. So for us, that was such a huge part. Just the dancing, the partying. You made that joke about having the dance in Turkey, and as a Mennonite, you could do that.
You're not supposed to bring that story up.
Oh, you're welcome. Is there a video? So obviously, I grew up with very, very social, partying, plotiche, mention people, and it wasn't necessarily about that religious part, but the religious or pious people I've met were nothing but wonderful, nothing but intelligent, had a ton of kids I could play with, and they were funny, and we had a good time, and I went to church, and and then I didn't, and it was never something to me of, and that was maybe just luck, that it was never something repressed for me. It was never something negative in that way, but that's me personally. I think, but what happens obviously in this book is that is not true for everyone. So it was very, very important for me to have, to have that LGBT aspect in there, because at some point when you grow up and you're a teenager, you ask yourself these questions. And then obviously I lived in America for the longest time, and we went to a Southern Baptist church. And that was even more, on the level where I was like, okay, well, this doesn't include everyone. And throughout the decades, what I witnessed was that it became less glittery, less sparkly, and it was less about people meeting and having fun, but it became quieter, and it had a very, very strange feeling of it. And what used to be so focused on friendship and so focused on community and being together became more and more about just like a literal sense of the Bible, something me as an American Studies major witnessed very much, obviously also with the, uprising of the right and taking all of this so literal. And so the feedback I got really in 2022 stopped around the age of 50. So some called it like a millennial Mennonite book. So the feedback I mostly got were from people who were in their maybe early 40s, some late 40s, but it really went up to them. They read it, and it was their book. It was for them, and they read it, and they were like, yes, because they were kids, they were teenagers. And I think it's not my place to write a book about adults who made the decision to leave the Soviet Union. And it's something I had learned. And I always thought, yeah, well, everybody left, so you just left. And my dad was like, no, you had to apply. It was a thing. Nobody let us go. Like, it was complicated. And I was like, oh, okay. And but that's something that that generation did in their 20s and 30s out of their free will. But if you were 5 or 15, it was something different you had to struggle with. And we have so many great books now in Germany and also nonfiction books that explain so much more. So me growing up, I thought I had the only cousin who was, addicted to heroin and ending up in jail all the time. All of a sudden I'm learning, oh, that was a thing. So it was a thing in the 90s for the Russian-German male youth to turn to drugs because they had arrived, their schooling wasn't recognized, they had no way of going to college, of having access to higher education. There's so many burdens, so many issues, and people can break from that, right? It did so much with their self-esteem because they really thought they were going to a place where they would be cherished and welcomed. And again, they had to start over. And again, they were belittled and treated so badly. So substance abuse is such a big topic, right? Or working yourself almost to death and not feeling anything. And so a lot of it came out during COVID. We started having podcasts. This book was pretty much the first one within that group. And it exploded. My DMs exploded. My mails exploded. The readings were so full. I mean, it was really for a year I was on tour. And it was people just crying in the audience. I mean, I still remember that. And it was so emotional because you could see for these 20-something, 30-something, 40-something, that really was their inner children in that moment starting to heal. So it was never about what the adults or the grown-ups did with that decision. And the very few responses that readings that I received, I always tried to stay polite. And I said, y'all had 30 years to write these books. Go write them. And even the people who came to Germany in the 70s, they had 50 years. And there are some texts, there are some good books, there's a lot of writing. And I was like, this is probably for everyone can read it. I mean, this is not, it's not like a law, but it was from a very specific perspective, and probably unintentionally for a very specific age group addressed, but never on purpose. But it ended up being that way. So the feedback I got was highly emotional.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Elina. We are going to move on to the signing portion of the evening, everybody. So that will take place over here on my right at the signing table. Please feel free to have a copy signed before you pay for it. So long as you visit the cash desk, whatever the name is, great. We'd like to give a big thank you again to CMU Press for publishing this book, and to Sue Sorensen for graciously being here to do the introductions. And of course to Andrew Unger for hosting. Let's give him a round of applause. Special guest, Elina Neufeld. Thank you so much, everybody. What do you want to say? Thank you.